The governing board. Let's start with the governing board. It's the final authority for the institution. It should publish statements of policy and procedure, and it should be aided by long-range planning by administration faculty. The president is the chief executive officer. The role of her or him is to plan and organize and direct and represent. The faculty, and this is what I want to stress here, has primary responsibility for curriculum, subject matter, methods of instruction, research, faculty status, and education-related aspects of student life. And this is an important line in here. The president or the board, should exercise adverse authority only in exceptional circumstances. That is, that they should contradict the voice of the fact that only in exceptional circumstances. So I think that's important to keep that in mind. What circumstances are exceptional? Well, that is somewhat contextual, situational, but the faculty should be prepared to say if they think so that these are not exceptional circumstances. That this is a prerogative that belongs with us, that resides in our hands. And so it goes on to say the faculty should be represented in university government at every level of faculty responsibility, that joint action should govern the establishment of structures and procedures for faculty participation in governance. And again, coming back to the jointness of things. Faculty should choose their own representatives. This gets to what Tom was pointing out earlier on, and we find instances where that does not occur in some of our state institutions. And then there's this bit. The means of communication among the boards of governors, president, faculty may include the circulation of reports, joint and ad hoc committees, standing liaison committees. Standing liaison committees. Come back to that. Faculty members on administrative committees and faculty membership on governing boards. Okay. Etc. And whatever the channels, they should be clearly communicated. So that's the framework that we have for thinking about how things should be. And it's important to recognize that statement was endorsed by the AAUP, the Association of Governing Boards, and the American Council of Education. It has broad penetration, broad stakeholdership across the country. So if administrators are choosing to do something differently, they need to know and they need to be reminded that they are departing from best practice. That is a mantra that should be repeated. Okay? They need to be reminded of that. There have to be special reasons to justify a departure from that kind of practice. At any rate, now the second statement that we have, and I'll just be very brief, it's really one of my favorite AAUP statements. It simply says and recognizes something that I think we all understand, that you don't have academic freedom without shared governance. You just don't have it. Shared governance is the mechanism by which it is defined, sustained, promoted, and defended. And so we have to always remember that. It's just a word or a term without shared governance, and the way that it functions is on the level of each campus, of each institution. But my favorite statement in that report is simply this line: faculty voice should be authoritative across the entire range of decision-making that bears, whether directly or indirectly, on its responsibilities. It's worth thinking about, because that extends into places that some of our universities and colleges our administrators don't want faculty voice to go. I think that's, and that's one of the problems that we're discussing here today. But the AAUP position is that faculty voice should be authoritative across the entire range of decision making that bears on faculty responsibility. So it's good to have that in your pocket, and to remind yourself that that is in fact what the best practice is for the country and for its constituent parts in higher education. Now, the good news is that AAUP continues to think about this problem and think about its implementation and to think about how this can be given effect. And very recently, in February of this year, a new statement was arrived at that deals with faculty communications with governing boards. I thought I would kind of throw this in because it gets to some of the things Brian was talking about early on, and what some of our other speakers have been touching on. And it says this. I just want to read it. You can read it. Faculty representation on an institution's governing board and its committee should not be a substitute for regular substantive communication between the faculty and the board, unmediated by members of the administration. Unmediated. Okay? Such communication is best accomplished through the establishment of a liaison or conference committee. This gets back to the original statement, the 1966 statement. That is, there's a long history here of agreement at the national level that there needs to be this kind of mechanism. Such communication is best accomplished through the establishment of a liaison or conference committee that consists only of faculty members and trustees, and that meets to discuss items brought to its attention by trustees or faculty members. Institutions must be clear about the role of the conference committee in their governance structure in order to avoid overlapping jurisdiction of the conference committee with standing committees of the governing board, the administration, faculty. So this idea of developing a regular mechanism that is unmediated by other members of the administration, in which faculty can talk to boards of governors, is now a national norm. And it's important to embrace that and to articulate that as we think about how we are doing shared governance at colleges and universities across the state of Colorado. Now, I just have sort of obsessively done a little bit of work in trying to figure out where we are on this in the state of Colorado. The situation currently is this, that in the state of Colorado, faculty and students have some representation on boards of governors, but lack the right to vote and participate in executive sessions. As the CSU, Alex Murnisek, the CSU representative to our governing board, said to me the other day, she said, well, I read the statement, and she said, and I think we're sort of in the ballpark in terms of compatibility with the AAUP statement. My response was, well, we may be in the ballpark, but we're no better than being in the near outfield. We're somewhere way out there, okay? And so I think it's important to understand that in the state of Colorado, a Rocky Mountain state, a western state, that we are not quite as well advanced in terms of our mechanisms, our connective tissue, and dealing with the boards of governors in specifics. We need to advocate for that. We need to try and create those mechanisms and have a better form of faculty voice, because I can tell you, and this kind of from Alex Bernasek, our CSU representative, She was recently dressed down by a member of the Board of Governors who told her in no uncertain terms that she was an employee and should understand her appropriate relationship in the system of things. Now, you go back to the 1915 statement of the AAUP, and it says, we are not employees, we are partners. We are partners with the administration and the Board of Governors. That was the starting position for the AAUP, and they haven't changed. Our organization hasn't changed. So it's really important to understand that faculty have a long history, and that when we think about best practice, there's this long tradition of standing up for this kind of relationship and asserting this kind of relationship and demanding this kind of respect from our administrative officers who have a tough job to do frequently, and from our boards. That it's a reasonable expectation in terms of best practices, etc. Now, I will also tell you we have no liaison committees in the state of Colorado. Not a single one. And in fact, it's worse than that. Our supposed flagship university, CU, has no faculty or student representation on the Board of Regents. And that's because that system goes back to 1876, before AAUP existed, and it's in the Constitution. No one has quite seen fit to modify that particular constitutional provision or put forward a constitutional amendment. I think that would be a hard sell, but nevertheless, I think we need to realize in the state of Colorado, and I'll quit here, that we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do in talking to our various constituencies and our representatives and others, and simply saying, these are best practices. We need this. Our institutions will be better governed. There will be less friction, possibly, if we have. I think it's a reasonable thing to assume that there will be clearer communication, more effective communication, and better understanding. Not necessarily agreement, but at least better understanding and the possibility for resolving disputes if we have these kinds of mechanisms. Yeah.
Are there any faculty reps to boards in the state of Colorado who have voting rights?
No. Not that I'm aware of.
Two more later.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, I'm done.
Hi, I'm the other Jonathan from Pueblo. I use Poritz as my last name. So I'm a mathematician, and I'm going to talk about IT issues. Before, I want to make a note to myself. We've had different names for administrators that we like. What was the institutional destruction and retrenchment? But my wife and I was an academic too. We had a joke at home. We had an assistant provost on our campus who, whenever you go to meetings, certain kinds of meetings, she shows up with door prizes at the meetings. And so when we call her in my house, we call her the assistant provost for T-shirts. So there's another name for institution. So anyway, I'm a mathematician, but I work a lot in computer science, and just to tell you where I'm coming from, all those kind of net neutrality things, and when Wikipedia, went black and all those, that's my home corner of the internet. I'm a part of the internet where the word hacker is a positive word and not a negative word. To some extent, compared to the incredibly tough battles that adjuncts are fighting, and our colleagues getting fired, some of these issues seem like they're less important. But we hear a lot also about IT things, and people have been concerned about their emails being watched and major decisions being made. And I think I want to try to make a case for just a couple minutes about where I think IT is, keeps coming up, and there's a reason, and it's going to come more and more in the future. And it's an area where we, I think as the AAUP, we haven't fought as hard as we could to get our greasy hands on the IT policy issues. I've written about this for a couple of AAUP things. In fact, by coincidence, just a few days ago, an article I wrote in the Journal of Academic Freedom on exactly, trying to convince exactly the same point, just came out. So, so shared governance is about, we should have, that wonderful line I go back to all the time, that statement about how faculty should have a primary driving role in decisions and policy, where we are, curriculum and scholarship and pedagogy and sort of anything even indirectly associated with those areas. And if you stop and think about, so communicating with your students, right? So now in the modern world, how do we communicate with our students? Well, we put something on a web page, or in some social medium, or we send email. And so the communication with students is almost, we stand in front of them and talk a lot of the time, but but a lot of it is going electronic, and ensuring the academic purpose of communication with students and the community is, I think, a fundamental aspect of shared governance. And the other thing, decisions that get made in IT groups that have to do with shared governance. Like, you just do an example. On our campus, we have something called the IT board. It's a board of the Senate that is supposed to be, if you read the faculty handbook, it's where the faculty give input to the IT services on campus for policies and decisions. And in fact, it mostly serves as a case where the IT service comes and tells us what we should tell our colleagues. The new decision isn't made. We are the sort of the PR agents for the IT service. And when I joined this committee, the first of several years ago, I'm now the chair, and when I joined it, the first meeting I went to, the head of IT, it was the CIO, he's a VP level officer on many campuses, and the CIO said, oh, by the way, we've renewed the contract with Blackboard for 3 more years. Please tell your colleagues that. And I just couldn't believe that. I mean, this was the first time, this is how we interact with our students, right? And we're proud on our campus, I don't know why, but we're proud on our campus about the penetration of Blackboard into the classroom and the number of classes that use Blackboard. And he was the first that the faculty knew that the contract was up and that they were negotiating, and it was the decision of that's called the learning management system. The decision to go with Blackboard as our next learning management system was when he was announcing, by the way, we've signed this contract for the next 3 years. And I was just so outraged. So I think we need to be more involved in these decisions. They have an incredible impact. And so let me just say a little bit about specific things. So there's the whole learning management system, which is just a nightmare. I do not like those pieces of software. I think they're a heavyweight solution to a lightweight problem. They're expensive. There are free alternatives. I don't know why campuses use the solutions they do. I think it's institutional inertia. There are lots of reasons. But that's an issue that we need to be aware of. But let me talk about 2 specific things having to do with communication. So being on the IT board on my campus, we have been involved in negotiations with our campus lawyer, and who had an office on our campus, but she's actually not officially part of our campus. She's part of the system office, who happens to be resident. She's kind of like an imperial governor in the colonies. And so we got we were called for an emergency meeting of the IT board at the end of last school year to rewrite the policy regarding emails. This is when the whole thing, so there's kind of a Harry Potter atmosphere in this meeting. It's that he who must not be named, and his name is Tim again. And we, because he sent this email to the whole campus, and it stirred up a little controversy, and it's absolutely fantastic. That's what we do, right? You're not pissing people off, you're not doing your job right, and the administration was really pissed off, and their solution was to try to cut off all future communication like that. So the CSU system, Board of Governors, leaned hard on the individual the campus lawyers to go and make sure that there was a policy implemented, and they got a lot of pushback on our campus. The faculty in the community said, we don't want there to be prior restraint of our public speech on this campus. That doesn't make any damn sense. And so the lawyers said, well, okay, we won't discuss this. I'm giving you a lot of detail on this, so I think it's typical of the shared governance and how these important issues are being kind of swept under the rug, and they're a big lump under this rug. So they told us not to, so the campus lawyer said she would take that information back to the system office, and there would be a further discussion. We'd revisit all of the policies, IT policies on the campus. And instead what happened was the Board of Governors, I don't know anyone who knows how this happened. Our faculty representative on the BOG did not know that this was happening, but they promulgated a new decision. This is if you go to the CSU system website, you can search for policies. It's policy number 127, and it says all the individual campuses shall have various policies regarding IT. And it specifically says that there shall be a policy implemented on each campus of the CSU system which requires any mass email to get approval of the president of that campus. So it's this weird sort of example of them deciding they need to control communication on our campus. And why that is appropriate. As I kept asking the attorney, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And my engineering colleague has taught me, when you make some solution, you ask first, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And so and they say, well, there's a lot of spam on this campus. So, and we need to cut that down. And they say also they want to harmonize the IT policies between the different campuses. How Fort Collins and Pueblo should have similar policies of any nature is on they're completely different institutions. So that's the kind of thing that we need to be careful. They promulgated this policy, and now it is in our lap to just react to this and to create a local policy that implements the central decision. So I think this is a classic example of complete failures of shared governance, and it's one that's going to factor academic freedom, our ability to speak to our colleagues and our students. So we need to be aware of these, and faculty need to be paying attention because this kind of thing is happening. I don't really know how this is playing. It's still playing out on our campus what the decision is going to be. We're trying to fight. I personally am trying to fight very hard about this actually being implemented on our campus. But there are lots of policies like this that we need to be paying attention to. I know it's a little hard to care about that when our colleagues are losing their jobs, for example. And I have every sympathy for that. But we need to be aware of these things. So, for example, there's also social media policies that are looming on the horizon. We heard in Kansas there's this horrible policy about it being a fireable offense if you, even on your personal Twitter feed, say something which is, the language is something like which is damaging to the brand of the Kansas State University system. Right? Brand is a word administrators love. Right? I'm not a brand. I'm not an employee. I'm also not fostering a brand. I don't want to be part of that. So we need to be. Fortunately, the proposed policy for social media on our campus is not quite as bad as the Kansas policy. But there are other, little details. Jonathan Reese was really concerned that we're going to get a really bad. He emails me sometimes about a bad social media policy. Actually, the proposed policy is not that bad. There's another hidden policy. I've been meeting all summer with these things, and one of the things they were designing a policy where the university should have exclusive control over all, and they use the term of art, university data. Right, so what exactly, and they should have exclusive control, and the way the policy was first written was it could not be on any computer that the central IT services did not administer and completely control. So you can't take university data on your home laptop, or you can't write an exam on your home computer because your exams that you write are university data. So anyway, that's a crazy idea, and it's in the process of crashing and burning. But this is the kind of thing that they're trying to do behind the curtain, and we need to be paying attention to it. So, I don't know, I think that I just would like people to be aware of these things. I think they're going to have an impact. And I think, so the BOG, I think, is a place to go, whatever board of trustees or governors or regents we have. They aren't aware that we are not employees and that we need to have a voice in these areas. And I think there was a lot of discussion about whether these are evil geniuses or whether they're astute. The quote I like on this is, there's a scene in Bob Woodward's book about All the President's Men where Deep Throat says to Bob Woodward in the parking instruction, he says, then you have to remember about these people is they're not very bright. Right? So that worked for Watergate, shining a light on it. I don't know if it will work for us, but I think a lot of people are not very bright, and we need to shine a light on the stupid actions that they do.
My name is Kathy Finder. I'm in the Department of Anthropology, and I am coordinator of the program of Gender and Women's Studies, and I'm affiliated faculty with Native American Indigenous Studies program. I've been here longer than anyone on campus except a guy in chemistry, so. I'll try to go through this kind of quickly. I'm nervous because I'm kind of differently positioned because I'm speaking to things that are on my own campus. But I wouldn't be speaking if I weren't optimistic. We have some shared governance issues at Fort Lewis. We don't have a policy on shared governance. We hardly ever talk about it. And I'm really excited to be able to talk about this and hope this opens other conversations. This is the statement. Oh, nice. Okay, well, on the statement on government and colleges and universities, the 1966 statement. So these are 4 sort of principles that have been pulled out from that. And I'm first going to go through in this talk to see how does Fort Lewis do in observing these principles. What are some things that have gone wrong? What is some groundwork that both administrators and faculty have laid? And what are some recommendations for better governance? I'd say something that's good. President Thomas convened an organizational task force in 2010 to address campus structural contradictions and inefficiencies. And something that we learned, it was a really good working group of people, is that campuses are really messy, that structures get internally contradictory, that blocks communication, that blocks governance. And one of the things that goes along with number 1, so that got cut off, but number 1 is recognition and respect for many and varied roles played by members of an academic community. That's out of the AAUP document. And we have some trouble at Fort Lewis because there's a lot of unclear and shifting notions of roles, I think particularly of department chairs. They don't get no training, they get no training, they get no respect. There are new managerial directors, and we don't know how long assistant and associate deans that are kind of handpicked stick around, so there's some lack of clarity there. The second one is information necessary for all to participate in discourse regarding good policy and practice needs to be disseminated in a timely manner. We have awkward communications at Fort Lewis. I skipped a slide. There's a mistrust of email, a reluctance to discuss big picture and higher ed issues. And the administrators assume that chairs during council of chairs meetings will communicate information to faculty, and that happens very irregularly. A lot of faculty don't recognize department chairs as sources of communication, and so they don't see them as any kind of authority whatsoever. So that's a problem with addressing number 2. Okay, that's there. It just got out of order. Okay. Number 3 is members of the academic community must have opportunities to provide input for decisions that will affect them before those decisions are made. Brian Burke talked a lot about the biggest issue on campus, which was this return to 3 credit hours, which was made with very little faculty input and so forth. And I won't belabor that here because we already talked about it. But another issue is Department of History recently had an external review. It had its self-study. And there's a lot of confusion about why the study that was written by a member of campus community and somebody who was brought in from a COPLAC institution kind of got buried, and a new study was done. Number 4 is that dissent from a majority view needs to be respected by all. And we have some trouble with trust and communication of Fort Lewis in that regard. A lot of people who dissent are viewed as troublemakers, headaches, uninformed, selfish, not working in the best interest of students. That's probably the most insidious kind of thing that's set up here, that if you have any kind of objection at all to managerial policies, you're therefore, you don't like students. And that syllogism is a false one, and it's really toxic here. And there's the same old thing. Tom brought this up about, I work in Ecuador, and I've often likened Fort Lewis College to a Latin American country. The way that it works, it's su merced, patrimonialism, do me a favor and I'll do you a favor. People, and to the current administration's credit, a lot of that has gone away. But it was there, and it's part of an ingrained structure where certain people have the ears of the administration. And the fact that, I don't want to belabor this, but all the administration is in the building with all the STEM disciplines, so that you can encounter one another in the bathrooms in ways you can't, I don't know, but that's a communication problem. And then this, this bothers me. Talented people have retreated from faculty governance. They say they're just going to put their heads down, they're just going to teach class, they're not going to join committees, they've had it, they're scared, they're tired, and that bothers me more than anything. Okay, positive groundwork the administration has laid. I'm really sorry about, I don't know how to do PowerPoints apparently. And again, this president's task force on reorganization in 2010, I just hope we can go back to that because the president couldn't implement many of the recommendations the task force made because we didn't have a new provost in place, and I hope she goes back to that. Some of the good things that have gone on since we have a new provost is a reduction of rewards and impunity to faculty members. There are faculty members who are bullies, who misrepresent what they do, who work the system. This is part of the systemic problem we have here, which is it's really good to not really have a system and not to have much governing. There's been an improvement of faculty salaries. There's strong support and advocacy for certain academic programs. Some faculty members are given opportunities for administrative experience, and we've had diverse faculty groups that are on the HLC Planning Commission. That says positive groundwork laid by the faculty. The Faculty Senate has a new leader, and it's recently reorganized and streamlined committees. There's still a lot of faculty members who, despite everything that's gone on, are committed to staying on committees and other governance activities. I think it's an extremely constructive response. As I've told some of my colleagues who somehow are scared of the AAUP or they think creating a chapter here was divisive, I said, well, you know, we could have formed a We Hate Administrators Club. We didn't do that. We joined the damn AAUP, which has been around for 100 years. How much more conservative can you be? You know? So I see that as very positive. And a couple of us wrote the first ever lengthy account of general education at Fort Lewis College with a strong recommendation that the college pay attention to its mission of serving Native American students. What makes shared governance difficult at FLC? Now I have to say, all these opinions are my own. You know, we started out as an Indian boarding school. We were a fort to protect the citizens from the Indians. Then we became an Indian boarding school. Then we became a 2-year industrial, agricultural, home economics, engineering / other things college. And then we became a 4-year, in the 1960s, liberal arts college that moved to the big town of Durango. So we have a really recent history. We're really new, we're really young. That history is important. And it's important when faculty members wonder, well, how can a liberal arts college have an engineering school and have a big school of business administration? Well, it's part of our history. It makes all kinds of sense. We could still be a liberal arts college and have all that. But what it's resulted in part, is dispersed governance. So the business school was often seen for many years as a fiefdom unto itself with a completely different salary structure and so forth. There are other places on campus that seem to have preferential treatment. And there's histories to that, and that's one problem. And I think this is national, but there's a lack of clarity regarding the distinction between governance and management. And I say this somewhere else in here, but faculty have been pulled into a lot of tasks that are really managerial, and that's not the same as governance. We need to talk about that. We did have almost no policies about anything, anywhere, and that gratefully has come to an end. We now have a policy library and we're paying attention to that. The title of my talk has the Foucauldian term governmentality in it. And it's mostly, I apologize, I'm not really going to talk about that, but it's to remind myself of a paper I need to write. Because I think some of what Foucault did talk about in terms of its biopolitics and the self-governing as a way both of powerful forces external to the state to run things, but also for people who were subordinated to the state to connect with each other in spite of the fact that the state is against them. I think a lot of that goes on at Fort Lewis and on other campuses, that the governing structure is not trusted or seen as ineffective, so the faculty find other ways to relate to themselves with a governing kind of mentality. And then we have a mixture of strong academic departments, weak department chairs, and strong deans, and the deans seem to be more closely tied upwards than downwards. That's a bit of a problem. Other difficulties, you just mentioned, incremental managerial additions to faculty workload have led to a pullback from governance. Faculty are just too busy. I talked about the personalismo, patrimonialism. New managerial compliance experts have been participating in faculty governance without discussion of their place in the overall structure of faculty committees, chains of power, and so forth. It's not their fault, they're caught between a rock and a hard place, but there's no idea of like where they fit. They're not administration, they're ni chicha ni monada, they're not faculty, but they're very powerful, they're very influential. And it's benefited some corners of administration and faculty departments to keep things loose. So I say up there, why is there such a gulf when all parties mean well? What do we do? And some suggestions, whoops, that's another slide out of sync. Let's see. Okay. When we look to solve problems of shared governance, we have to do more than deploy rhetoric of let's all be nice, why can't we get along? If you're critical, it means you're not a nice person, you don't like students. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's more intra-faculty than external. There's a lot of fear invocation, though, on the part of administration that oh my God, HLC, and then that trickles to faculty who are really freaked out. Like, what? Oh my God, you're jeopardizing our accreditation by HLC, by you being a complainer. And we need to stop that, this idea that we're not going to survive and that we have to like break all the rules or shut people up. There are divisions between complex layers, so administrators versus faculty, which is not really true. Tenured versus non-tenured, subversive faculty versus good soldiers, older versus newer faculty. These things are used as basis for people to argue with each other, but they're not helpful to keep talking in those terms. There's a problem when change is effected using principles and behaviors that contradict liberal arts values. That's a huge problem. And we need to talk about it on campus. Free speech, liberal thinking, the kind of citizen we want to produce, the flexibility and openness necessary in the marketplace today for jobs. When the policies that are imposed, new practices by campus administration, are contrary to what our mission is as a college, that's something we need to talk about. Against management being against students. Perceptions of institutional production of indifference. Michael Hertzfeld, anthropologist who works in Greece, talked about the social production of indifference, and I think that's something that's gone on here that we need to look at culturally. Many faculty believe that the administration doesn't care about what they do, that the attention is turned to the most productive areas of campus. It's sort of, we don't know how it works, but you walk downtown and there's the big Fort Lewis Welcome Center on Main Street, and the only thing represented is what the engineering department is doing, and you walk in, you go, well, that's just in the window, maybe they change it out. The only brochures they have to distribute are engineering, geology, and another STEM field. And who planned that, and why is that? And I just felt like, that's a type of indifference that trickles down to everybody. I also say here, it got cut off, that administrators are not regularly and robustly reviewed by the faculty, which I think is a recommendation that comes out of AAUP. And then suggestions for improving groundwork for shared governance. So, you can read that. Maybe we're talking about going to 3 credit-hour courses and then faculty getting a course reassignment for conducting research. It's a good idea, but nobody has talked about the details. But something that hasn't been discussed is faculty who are concerned. This is not a research-one institution. This is a liberal arts college. There's a whole lot of governance work that faculty members have to do. Can we put into the mix talking about governance activities being tied to a course release? Faculty, another suggestion is that faculty acculturation should be shaped by faculty across campus, not just by departments. Right now, Fort Lewis is another reason we're a weird hybrid, is that we're a liberal arts college, but we behave like a quasi-university, where departments have a lot of power. There's almost cult-like creations of insularity in particular departments, and it might help faculty governance in general and faculty learning about the governance process if there was if that was just expanded. New mandates from the federal government, HLC, from legislature, and so on should be treated as intellectual problems that merit immediate discussion by all who share governance before making administrative decisions in cabinet. We all need to be talking about big picture issues. I thought I got 15 minutes.
That's cheese.
Make sure governance decisions, invite a lot more, this is the board stuff that was just discussed. We need much more representation and access to the board. Board meetings, board members should be invited to classes, faculty talks, faculty senate meetings. They should be given our publications to read. They don't know who we are. One person on the board elected by the faculty who doesn't get to vote is not enough. You know, so students keep being told, like, the job you have, you're going to be 15 different jobs between now and then. You need to be really flexible. We need to do what you want. A post-Fortist economy is an on-demand economy. And yet, we're supposed to create 5-year assessment plans and 2 to 3 year catalogs that don't ever change. What? Okay. And then, draw from democratic critical theory. I have to put it in here. We need to consider as a campus treating those with whom we disagree as a loyal opposition. We shouldn't be calling them stupid. We shouldn't be calling the enemy. We shouldn't be calling the evil empire. We should be considering people as adversaries, because you can engage with adversaries, not with enemies. We should resist mystification by everybody. Everybody needs to act like a smart faculty member, including administration. So talk to each other. We have to do assessment, we know that. Outcomes is really kind of a good thing to talk about, get our heads around, but we don't have to accept talking about outcomes without also acknowledging there's a huge industry out there that's like the SAT industry and so forth, that's centered around assessment and on promoting platforms like Canvas and so forth. Can't we just talk about that? I think administrators should have to teach once a year, see who we are by being one of us. And then finally, my last comment is that, final comments. One is that it's always said that it's difficult for the faculty and administration to get along because of the culture of this campus, but nobody has ever studied the culture of the campus. Culture and the study of culture is actually a professional enterprise. They brought in psychological mediators and counselors, but there are professional ethnographers who can come in and look at what's going wrong with campus culture. They might consider that. I have some names if you're interested. And one thing too, people talk about administrators being stupid or whatever. I was talking to Gary a second ago. They're from a different culture anymore. They go to their own conferences and we go to our conferences. Administrators used to come up from the faculty and know the institution. Those days have changed, and we don't know each other's cultures very well. So it's not that they're not listening, they don't understand our language or we theirs. That's part of the cultural problem. And then finally, we talk a lot on this campus about wellness. We make it this part, we make a big deal, we insist on having a wellness component to our curriculum. But right now, we're not in a very well state. Faculty members that I know are in a high state of anxiety. People are going to counselors and therapists who never have before. They're feeling just completely crushed, dispirited. They don't know what to do. They know if, like Professor Boulanger, they leave, there's no other way, especially if you're already at the mid-level, the tenured level, getting another job is almost impossible. So I think we should think about the fact that wellness isn't just creating a kind of smoke-free campus. To me, these kinds of things are important. They're really superficial. We need to look at the fact that the good health of ourselves, the administrators, and especially the students is benefited by the rest of us working together with shared governance to do our damn jobs. Thanks.
My name is Jane Fraser, and I'm chair of the Department of Engineering at CSU Pueblo. I'm also the president of the AAUP chapter there. I'd like to start with, in fact, the article that Steve referenced, which is really quite good, the Feb 2014. It's called Faculty Communication with Governing Boards Best Practices, and it is a really great statement. I'd just like to read the first paragraph. From its initial statement of principles in 1915 and its earliest investigations into violations of academic freedom, the AAUP has emphasized the necessity of effective communication among those who participate in academic governance. Based on a consideration of relevant AAUP documents and in view of the current climate in higher education, this statement urges greater communication between faculties and governing boards in colleges and universities. Communication between the faculty and the governing board differs in obvious ways from faculty communication with administrative officers. Faculty members and administrative officers ordinarily engage in both formal and informal meetings and discussions through ongoing joint governance activities. By contrast, communication between faculty and board members, when it occurs at all, tends to be ritualized, infrequent, and limited to specific agenda items. Well, I'd like to emphasize those last two paragraphs. On our campus, unfortunately, the communication with the faculty, with the administration, between faculty and administration has broken down almost completely. And so what this article characterizes as ordinary, engaging in both formal and informal meetings and discussions through ongoing joint governance activities is really almost collapsing, we would say, on our campus. And I just want to talk about that a little. To begin with, one of the things I just wanted to dispute a little is that it's called faculty communication. And I've always worried about that word communication. You know, we have our provost where when some proposal he made didn't go over well with the faculty, and he was asked what did he learn from that episode, he said that he learned he just hadn't communicated well. And so what they mean by communication is that they didn't make it clear exactly what they were telling us to do. And so I've always, of course, preferred much more words like consultation or, shared governance. That would be a good phrase to describe that. So communication, they tend to interpret as one way. I think we've got to be very careful about that. And one of the issues that has arisen on our campus recently is that they don't answer our email. They don't answer the dean's email. I mean, it's just appalling what's going on in terms of that. Tim mentioned this already, but I'm a department chair, and at the recent meeting Wednesday of our department chairs in my college, my dean said that he had been told to tell us that we are not to communicate directly with the president and provost, which is, just really shocking. So one of the things I work on, I do a lot of community work, and working with people, and we're organizing the fundraising breakfast for the Girl Scouts. And so I was sending out invitations to a lot of people on and off campus to attend this, and so I included the president and the provost in the invitation. And I was just laughing so hard in my own office when I hit send on that email. I'm not allowed to communicate with you. So I predict that I won't even get a reply to that, which I just think is really interesting. There's also, by the way, a backstory on that, because about a year or two ago, the system attorney that some of us from CSU Pueblo have mentioned several times, we had a forum because there was issues about conflict of interest, and also part of that conflict of interest policy in our handbook includes statements about how we can use university resources. And she made the statement that we can't use university resources to support nonprofit organizations. And so I raised my hand and asked her, this morning, this had been a couple of years ago, but again, I was doing stuff for the Girl Scouts. And I had said to her, I just sent out all these invitations to the Girl Scout breakfast. Was that an improper use of my email? And she replied, yes. To which, the audience exploded, and I laughed at her. I mean, what else can you do at that point? So I'm just very proud of sending email to my president and provost, inviting them to the Girl Scouts breakfast. So the communication on campus is really breaking down. I mean, this notion, I love the description here, ordinarily engage in both formal and informal meetings and discussions through ongoing joint governance activities. And all of those things are being whittled away on our campus. And many of the formal ones, the Senate are still there. When I reported in an email conversation, in our private emails, we don't use our campus emails to talk about AAUP business. When I mentioned to my colleagues about this latest thing, somebody wrote back and said, well, send them an email that's related to AAUP business. They have to respond to you on that. So we will see. Let me talk to the board, turn to the governing boards now. And in some ways, we do fit the description here. Communication between faculty and board members, when it occurs at all, tends to be ritualized, infrequent, and limited to specific agenda items. So the Board of Governors is a shared Board of Governors among the 3 campuses, Global, Fort Collins, and us. But they do meet once a year in Pueblo. And so Jonathan and I took the opportunity to attend that Board of Governors. And we also thought we would make a statement, but we had never been to one of these before, so we tried to figure out how we do that. It took about 5 or 6 emails from me to the relevant staff person at the Board of Governors to drag out of her how we go about making a statement, but we have to be there to sign up ahead of time. How long are we allowed to talk? And do they take questions or do we only make statements? I had to ask her every specific thing. It was so painful to drag it out of her. And it turns out that in the 2-day meeting of the Board of Governors, they allow 10 minutes for comments. And you have to be there before that time and sign up for it. And the number of people who sign up, they take the 10 minutes and divide it among them. And so I guess if 100 people showed up, you need to get 30 seconds. There were 3 of us that day. And so each of us came up to, as we came up to speak, there's a little thing in front of you with the countdown all the time, and it starts beeping at you if you're going over and so forth. I mean, it's just really offensive. The same attorney that I have mentioned several times came up later on to make fun of my colleague Jonathan Poritz because she said to him, "I've never heard you speak so quickly." I snapped at her and said, we were put in this embarrassing position of having to speak that quickly, and you're coming up to make fun of him because that's what happened. It was just really awful. We do have some of the AAUP best practices, and again, this article is really great. We do have, as has been mentioned, we have a faculty representative. We have one from each of the 3 campuses, Global, Fort Collins, and Pueblo, not voting. So in fact, that's really good, and I think we're going to be working together to try and make more use of that. But because there are clear misconceptions that the boards have a lot about what faculty members do. We've talked about that before already, in particular on workload, and especially the length of the semester at CSU Pueblo. There was a discussion going on at the last Board of Governors. This stuff is just so funny. I mean, there was a discussion going on, and one of the board members turned to our president of Pueblo and said, "Now, you don't have to respond to this, but I just want to make a statement that, we've had this report that shows that 94% of your faculty are rated in the top categories. That's not a bell curve." I'll let Jonathan respond to that one. And this just can't be possible. And then a few minutes later, they then rated all 3 presidents at the highest level of Oh, yeah. But during this business about the discussion of our workload and the implicit subtext is that we're all lazy bums, the chancellor who loathes Pueblo, he just thinks this part of the state, he says, look at it, look at your people, it's just awful to hear him talk about it. He couldn't control himself, and he blurted out in the middle of the meeting that our semester is 2 weeks shorter than in Fort Collins, which I don't think is true, but I should have simply stood up and said, we work on Labor Day, which is true from August until Thanksgiving. We have no days off, so, and they're pushing us to have another week, and then they're saying, well, if we had it, because you need that, because you're in violation of workload and all sorts of stuff like this. And then you could have vacation days. Well, wait a minute, you can't have both of these. So that it's just, we need to do more in terms of trying to educate them. Alex, who was mentioned already, and our representative, Mike Minsick, are already going to try and propose that they can do a little workshop for the Board of Governors members and see if they can educate them about all the things that we actually do. I did also want to mention the last paragraph of this article is also very good and recommends, it summarizes what's recommended in the report, that every standing committee of the governing board, including the executive committee, should include a faculty representative, that new faculty members of the governing board should participate in orientation for the new trustees, and that direct communication between the faculty and the governing board should occur through a liaison or conference committee consisting only of faculty members and trustees, and meeting regularly to discuss topics of mutual interest. This is a great statement. I really urge you to read it. And I did just have a few more comments. I wanted to sort of talk about, so what are we trying to do at CSU Pueblo? And I think in light of this whole notion of communication and transparency and things being shut down more and more on our campus, we're trying to make AAUP be the beacon of light in the darkness that is continuing to come in. And so we started in the spring, and I've been sending out a regular email, campus-wide. I just love doing this stuff. Called News from the AAUP, which I try and write in as flat a tone as possible, just very factual. My view always is the outrage will come from the readers. And so I'm already working on the next one, which I, again, plan to juxtapose this Board of Governors complaint about our ratings with their ratings of the president as the next, the president says the next item. And people are really thrilled by that. People have come up and they clutch me by the arm and they say, thank you, I have no idea what's going on campus if I didn't have your emails. People have already been asking me, where are they? We just finished the second week of classes and people are saying, where is this? So, I think that's one thing we can do is put out information as the administration continues to be less transparent, less open. We've got to be even more of that. It can be used against us, I'm sure. The other thing is I went to summer camp, or boot camp, I guess it's called, which was just fantastic. And Summer Institute, I'm sorry.
Boot camp will do.
Boot camp will do. We actually stayed in the dorms, so it's boot camp. But it was really wonderful. I mean, I got to hang out with Ross, my colleague from Fort Collins, and people from all over the country. And again, this just like the feeling today of you're with like-minded colleagues and really just wonderful. I did the 3 sessions on the financial management. I know enough to be really dangerous, I think. Jonathan had said, I'm already a badass, but that if I went to that, I would now be a well-educated badass. But one of the ideas I really got from that I think is very important is we're not allowed to be a negotiating unit in this, in Colorado. We can only be advocacy, but what I heard over and over again there, and I think it's very important, is the handbook is our contract. The handbook is our contract. And so one of the things I think is on our AAUP agenda also this year is to go through that handbook and really maybe be proposing some pretty substantive changes because the handbook is our contract. And so I'll leave you with those thoughts. But have fun when you're doing this too.
Hello. First I want to say it's nice to be here at Fort Lewis. I'm very inspired by the way the chapter here is arising to meet your considerable challenges. And something else I want to say is I'm freezing. I'm going to risk taking my jacket off, and only because there's a camera there. I do wonder if this is a tactic of the administration. Freeze out the shared governance. That may sound paranoid, but I've seen things like that. My name is Eron, and I recently retired after a 25-year career as a senior instructor in the program for writing and rhetoric at the University of Colorado Boulder. And over the course of my 25-year career, I did not for a single second enjoy legal protection for my academic freedom. And Steve mentioned earlier, and I should comment on this just briefly, I am a member of the National AAUP's Committee A on Academic Freedom and Tenure. Committee A is the historic committee that defined the standards for academic freedom and tenure over the last century. And we also censure institutions, or we play a role, I should say, in censuring institutions that violate those standards. So, because we're perceived at times as having this power and authority, whenever I speak at a forum like this, I always feel that it's necessary to say that I am not speaking at all on behalf of Committee A of the National AAUP. And I'll also say that if you get, typically, I've observed that if you get maybe 10 academics in a room, you get 12 opinions. And it's like that with Committee A as well. And I just want to say before I get started, I'm not going to talk for very long, mostly because I plan to say exactly the same stuff that my distinguished panelists have also said. So I'm sure a lot of you are ready to get to the Q&A. Sometimes something happens that sort of hits you as a bolt from out of the blue that you did not expect, you did not see coming whatsoever. Josie was talking earlier about some favorable thing that happened in Tennessee. And she credited a man by the name of Alfred Lutz, who is a professor at Middle Tennessee State. Over 20 years ago, Alfred Lutz was a colleague of mine in what was then the University Writing Program at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And he was a friend of mine. And I remember very clearly at one faculty meeting, the annual meeting when we were talking with the dean said something, and a light went on in Alfred, and he laid into the dean. And they had this back and forth for 25 minutes, where he was virtually screaming at the dean. And after that, Alfred was a friend of mine, so I told him, I really admire you doing that. But at the same time, I really thought, why does he care so much? Why does this matter so much to him? And one thing led to another, which led to another, which led to another, and 10 or 15 years later, I became Alfred Lutz. I became Tim McGettigan. Enough said. I'm just, we have the Red Book, which is the Bible, and I think, as Steve said, some people wonder, well, what are the really important documents in the Red Book? And the central document is the 1940 Statement on Academic Freedom and the 1970 interpretation of the 1940 document. The other big policy is the recommended institutional regulations. Those are together the backbone of the AAUP. Then also Steve mentioned the 1966 Statement on Governance. And in the 1966 statement, there is a glaring omission. And as a result of that glaring omission, we have the 1994 Statement on the relationship of faculty governance to academic freedom. Now, there are plenty of other classic documents, but they deal with particular cases, or I should say, particular issues. Now, if you read the 1940 statement, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, but if you actually read it, you might be surprised to find that it is not the stellar and stout defense of academic freedom that you might wish it to be, or desire it to be. It's actually a shorter, sort of refined version of the 1915 statement. And in many ways, the 1950 statement reflected a couple of different things. One thing was that at that time, academic freedom pretty much did not exist. And one implication of academic freedom not existing is that you never knew whether you can believe somebody. For example, E.A. Seligman, who would later become one of the founders of the AAUP, was a conservative economist. Now, at the time, trustees of institutions also tended to be very conservative businessmen, and their ideas were consistent with that of a conservative economist. So Seligman would get in debates at forums, and he espouses conservative economic theories, and everyone would believe that he's just saying that. He does not really believe that stuff. He's just saying that so he does not get fired. Well, that's one of the implications. That's what happens. You don't know what to believe. There's no academic freedom. Another condition at the time, and I owe this insight to Ellen Schrecker, the academic freedom historian, in a recent academe. She pointed out that one of the reasons for the founding of the AAUP is that the founders wanted the academic profession to be on equal footing with the other professions, such as law and such as medicine. I'm going to read you two sentences from the 1940 statement. Institutions of higher education are conducted for the common good and not to further the interests of either the individual teacher or the institution as a whole. The common good depends upon the free search for truth and its free exposition. When we in the academic the academic profession wanted to be on equal footing with law or with medicine, we faced a very, very steep problem. By and large, lawyers and doctors at the time were independent practitioners. Right. We, however, had bosses. We were employees. So we could not be on equal footing in many ways. Well, the antidote to that was this sort of marriage of the idea of academic freedom and the good of society. And the formulation went something like this, that yes, as the pursuers and the transmitters of knowledge, we do indeed have employees. I was an employee of the University of Colorado, but only in the most nominal sense of the term. I was really not an employee so much, but what I worked for throughout my career was the good of society, as I understood it to be. But I had to operate within certain parameters. But these were not parameters which were decided by, for example, the Board of Regents of the University of Colorado. These were not parameters that were decided by the taxpayers, or by radio jocks, or by the administration of the University of Colorado, or by the chair of my department. I worked within parameters that were determined and formed by my profession and by my discipline. Now what this does is put great power to the collective academic freedom of the profession and of the discipline to limit individual academic freedom. I'll say that again. What this does is give great power and authority to the collective academic freedom of the profession and the discipline to limit individual academic freedom. So what are the limits of individual academic freedom? Well, in general, it comes down to professional fitness or professional competence. Does your opinion present clear evidence that you're professionally unfit? Do you have an opinion that presents clear evidence that you're professionally unfit? I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm an engineering professor, and I hold the view as an engineering professor that creationism is the truth. Right? Does that comment on my fitness as an engineering professor, on my scholarship, and on my teaching? In all likelihood, not. So academic freedom covers my right to have an opinion in this sort of extramural speech. However, let's say that I am a biologist, and I teach that creationism is the truth. And I'm denied tenure explicitly for that reason. Is that a violation of academic freedom? No, it's not. I may think it is, but that opinion, that view is beyond the parameters of the profession. And therefore, it reflects upon my competence, or I should say incompetence, to teach biology at the professional level. Now, the 1940 statement covered 3 areas of academic freedom: teaching, research, and extramural utterances, which in effect said that, when you're working out, when you're talking, when you're expressing yourself outside the parameters of your profession, you have the same rights as every other citizen. Right? Was something missing from those 3 areas? Basically, teaching, research, and extramural expressions. Was something missing, something that you guys confront all the time, something that maybe frightens you guys, something that maybe makes you think that, well, maybe if I speak up here, I'm going to get fired, that really has nothing to do with teaching, and nothing, exactly. Then came the 1966 statement, and you guys have commented on that. It's a wonderful statement. It describes the various functions of the sort of 3-headed monster of academic freedom. The trustees who have financial control, the administrators who administrate, and the faculty who controls the educational policy supposedly. By the way, that's not unlimited. The faculty's control of the educational product. For example, at most instances, most institutions, the educational goals are really defined by the charter of the institutions. For example, let's say that I'm at a land-grant institution, right? Can the faculty decide then, well, we don't really want to be an agricultural school, we want to be an art studio? No, you can't do that. There are limits to the extent to which you can define the educational product of your institution. And as mentioned earlier, the area of your responsibility is supposed to be the area of your authority, although the trustees do have the final word. Every institution in the country, the trustees do have the final word. So there's always this tension between that and the right of the faculty to dictate the educational policy. Now, one of the interesting things about the 1966 statement is that although it was implicit everywhere, it never explicitly said that even though it's your ethical responsibility to participate in shared governance, it never explicitly says that you can't get fired for that. That academic freedom covers that. It wasn't really until the 1994 statement on the relationship of faculty governance to academic freedom that an AAUP policy document actually said that academic freedom covers your right to speak out on matters of institutional importance. Now, thank you for listening. And let's go on to, I had a lot more stuff, but these guys stole it from me, as I mentioned earlier. And shame on you.
Still like 10 minutes before lunch, so let's do some Q&A. Anyone?
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed at my campus is you're not allowed to speak for the university. And I just wondered in this idea of shared governance, if there are 3 entities, can they forbid us from speaking for the faculty of the university? If anybody wants to?
Just that, no, I don't think they can. You can't be the voice of the University of the Public. For example, just to tell you a quick anecdote, I think this was at our first, this is back in, the AAUP, our state chapter passed the so-called contingent faculty bill in 2012, HB 121144. And this was opposed, the year before we took a run at that too, and this was heavily opposed by the University of Colorado. Heavily opposed. And then after that, I testified, and clearly I just did everything the opposite of what they said. I said, oh, by the way, I'm speaking as an individual here, and I was a part of the University of Colorado. I think they kind of understood that by that point. So, yeah, you just have to make it clear. Now, one problem which emerges is that sometimes in social media, on Twitter, for example, you have 140 characters. Do you really have the time to say, well, I'm not speaking on that?
Anyone else? Questions? Really? There's not another question? Yeah.
Is the requirement of the use of a course management system infringing on academic freedom?
I think so. Although it seems to be, I haven't seen, I don't know if it's, no, actually, I think CSU Global, they require, it's an online, it's basically a for-profit university hiding in the CSU system, but so they require lots of things in their faculty, but I don't know of any really traditional university or college that require. A lot of them are very proud of what they have and push the numbers that they use in particular with LMS, but I don't know of anyone that requires it.
You actually brought up my very favorite subject. No, but it's coming. This is the future. I did an article in Academe precisely about this. They're going to do it. They'll do it allegedly for the name of students. They'll do it allegedly for the name of efficiency. And they're going to say all your interactions with the students online. It almost makes sense in an all online college to use the same LMS. And in person for those reasons, and it will. And we have to be prepared to have that struggle because it's going to happen very, very soon. But no, not yet. But it's coming.
These rules, the rules are bizarre, and some of them are promulgated and no one really is told. For example, on our campus, we're not allowed to use email. There's an official policy. We are not supposed to communicate with our students using anything other than our official campus email account.
Or when it's being recorded?
To their account. Pardon me?
No, I meant, or when it's being recorded, you know.
Yeah, no, that's it's true. They are everything. You know, people talked about their emails being read. You know, using the campus email system, they have the right to look at everything you say. So if you want to have private conversations, talk to a computer scientist. We know how to do secure communications, but don't use the couple. But you know, that's a policy on our campus which is widely ignored. But you know, they can make these policies, and eventually, I agree with John. Eventually, they'll start to enforce. They'll say, "Hey, wait a second. You wrote an email to your students. It's a private email account. That's not allowed."
Yeah.
So I had a question for the whole panel, but for Steve in particular. And I was wondering if there's any examples of shared governance courses for undergraduates. I know that as a student myself, moving up through the different levels, I never had a course on shared governance. And it seems like these are issues that are endemic in other areas of life, right? They transfer into the academic sphere, but they also seem to be, we don't practice shared governance in other areas as well. And so I was wondering, are there general education curriculums that have examples of courses on shared governance as a means of trying to teach these principles?
I'm not aware of it. As a matter of fact, in our department, I'm in the political science department, a few years ago, since we have a regular sort of colloquium for our graduate students that they must attend, and it's focused on professional matters. I put together a presentation on the nature of university and departmental governance, because one of the serious problems that we have is that we're sending young would-be professors out to interview at universities without a clue about the organizational structures that they are visiting and that they may be hired into. It is, I think, ubiquitous in the United States for all of us to learn that on the job. I never had such training. Indeed, I had very few conversations with any of my professors about university governance. If I hadn't been the graduate member of a few committees at the University of Arizona, I wouldn't have had a clue, et cetera. And I was one of the lucky ones. So I think that this is an area actually where I think universities fall down, colleges and departments fall down, disciplines fall down. The disciplines are not doing a good job of educating their professionals about the nature of university governance. And it's a sort of a favorite hobby horse of mine to be on that point. It's a black hole right now. But we do need to have more conversation, and we need to find situations where we can talk about these issues with students, with graduate students, and with colleagues, because it's just it doesn't work very well for us to be expected to sort of acquire this knowledge through osmosis, or after spending 10 years working in a department and the light bulb goes on, we're seeing certain patterns over and over and over and over again, and maybe there's a reason for that. So, yeah.
Just maybe one more on the here and then one more on there.
There is a field called academic labor, which is an expanding field. Jeffrey Williams refers to it as critical university studies. And if critical university studies ever becomes an academic discipline, then courses will be offered to undergraduates. These issues.
Maybe one more from the field. Yeah.
So I was really happy to hear so many of you addressing this issue of trying to shift towards the AAUP best practices model for faculty board of trustees communication. That we made a decision as a local chapter of the AAUP that we were gonna have as one of our priorities this year to try to start that conversation on our campus and try to get people moving in that direction. And I'm wondering if any of the panelists have some advice on how we would have that conversation, where we started, and how to have it in an effective way that might actually result in change.
That's a really good question. Jay and I went to the Board of Governors meeting in Pueblo just a few weeks ago, and someone was making a comment about the different cultures, and it's like you step into a parallel universe. I think that's also a priority for our chapter, and I think it's really important. And I don't know, I would love to hear some insights, maybe people with more experience. It seems like they speak such a different language. You know, we gave our rushed 10-minute discussions, and the only thing they heard, they finally came back 3 hours later, made some passing comment. We said it was completely different from the main points we were trying to make. It's like it's very strange.
Speaking of critical university studies.
So here's one example that I heard from, as Ken said to me when he asked me if I wanted to have lunch with him, can you be seen with someone from the dark side? So I heard this on the dark side, on a committee of presidents and trustees, where they're talking about exactly this issue, how to promote communication between trustees and faculty. And they sort of did almost like a true confession, like, wow, we tried this and it actually worked. Like, they're human beings, the faculty, they actually care. The topic that one of these boards addressed was try and pick an area of work that you think there's some kind of common concern from the standpoint of the faculty and the board. Like, start small, don't try and do something. In this case, it was cost of textbooks. Cost of textbooks. Like, cost matters now. You're a pretty low tuition institution, but still, cost matters. Board members care about costs to students. And they were shocked that in this working group, faculty were coming up with all kinds of creative ways, kind of like you were talking about with IT. We're aware of doing things and getting access to information that isn't always the latest textbook at the highest cost. We might even suggest that you get your textbook online, as somebody said. It was Miranda, right? We might suggest you purchase your textbook at a local bookstore where it's cheaper than the campus bookstore. So they created a work group between the board and the faculty on a very specific issue that had arisen locally. Your issue might be different, but it was a local issue that mattered to the faculty, that the board understood, and even though they do speak a different language, in this case, it was an education for them that the faculty actually cared about the cost their students were bearing for textbooks. And it was a way of building some sort of sense of common purpose.
All right, we have run out of time here. Please come back in an hour after you're well fed for more critical university studies.
There is in this exact building